Welcome to Talking Bible. I'm your host, Balthazzar. Today we are in Matthew chapter 14. Matthew 14. Okay, here in Matthew 14, if you don't know, this is the middle of the book of Matthew. There are a couple big events. First of all, we have a death of our beloved John the Baptist. We also have the feeding of 5,000 and Jesus walking on water. Let's kind of break down Matthew chapter 14. So you first get this description of how John dies. And it's quite a dark tale about how this queen asked for his head. And John gets decapitated. And this news gets to Jesus and the disciples, and they just want a moment to get away. But they don't get this because this crowd of people hears about Jesus coming to town. And they surround Jesus and ask him to teach and do his thing. And Jesus has compassion on the crowd. And Jesus talks. But just because Jesus had compassion doesn't mean the disciples felt the same way. Because the disciples try to find an excuse to get rid of the crowd. And this perfect opportunity comes. They have to eat. So the disciples bring this dilemma up to Christ, Jesus, and they ask, hey, we don't have food to feed these people. We should send them out and let them go buy their own food. And Jesus goes, no, we'll feed them. They're like, Jesus, but we only have like 5 loaves of bread and a couple fish. Jesus goes, no worries. So he instructs the crowd to sit down and he feeds the 5,000. But right after that, I don't know if you caught this, it goes immediately after he fed them, he sent the disciples out on a boat. And then he dismissed the crowd. Okay, now, I don't know if that sounds to you like it sounded to me. Jesus sent them away because Jesus was disappointed in them and he didn't want to deal with them because he's already dealing with his friend's death and this crowd. So he sends his disciples away to be alone like they wanted to. Then he dismissed the crowd, and then Jesus goes off by himself to pray. The disciples on the boat isn't really a good time, if you know what I mean. There's this windstorm picking up. And this isn't just like, a breeze. No, this is some type of wicked storm, crazy storm. Because most of the disciples are fishermen, okay? And they're freaking out. And then they see this thing on the water, right? It's kind of walking towards them. And they assume is that it's a ghost. They start freaking out more. There's a freaking windstorm, and in the windstorm is this ghost. And Jesus goes, no, I'm not a ghost. I'm Jesus. Peter being Peter goes, oh, if you're really Jesus, have me walk on the water with you. Jesus is like, oh, what? Yeah, come on. Water's great. So Peter walks out on the water. Okay, so we know Jesus is God here and him walking on water and whatever. But Peter, a normal man walking on water, crazy. But you notice in the same passage, Peter is walking towards Jesus, looking at Jesus, but when he stops looking at Jesus, he began to sink. And Jesus comes up, picks him out of the water, and then Jesus comes up to him, picks him out of the water, and lectures him. Why'd you doubt me, Peter? I love it. He immediately starts lecturing Peter in the middle of this windstorm, waves being tossed, them in the water, Peter practically drowning, and Jesus is lecturing Peter. And then he puts Peter back on the boat and then stops the storm. Okay, now I don't know if you noticed what I noticed. If he had the power to stop the windstorm the whole time, why did he stop it when the windstorm was overwhelming Peter? It'd be so much easier for Jesus to pick him out of the water and like calm sea. Or heck, why is Jesus walking on a storm-filled water? Like, it would be so much easier for him to walk out just to the boat with no wind or storms, right? But no, he waited until he is safe on the boat to stop the storm. Now, I heard several different scholars and people kind of trying to dissect this. My favorite way to think about this is what we should be doing. Peter was walking on the water. He had his trust and hope on Jesus. But when he started noticing the windstorm, he started having doubts about who God was and who Jesus was, and he started to sink. And during that sinking, Jesus had to remind him who he is. I think there's a few different lessons here that we can have our eyes and hopes on Jesus during the storm. And Jesus is going to be there, right there, when we think it's overwhelming and we might drown. And Jesus one day will put us back in the boat and show us the calm storm and show us the calm sea again. Because Jesus' timing isn't always ideal for us, but it is ideal for him and his purposes. I think you see that through this whole entire chapter, that there's all these events that doesn't seem ideal for the disciples. The first one is this crowd showing up after their friend's death. The ideal thing to do here is mourn your friend's death. But Jesus saw the compassion, and that wasn't the ideal time to grieve. Jesus later found the time to grieve by himself and pray. Just like saving Peter from a storm, there might be a storm in your life, whether it's a death of a close friend or a family member. There might be a storm where you're suffering from cancer, suffering from something, but that's not the ideal time for it. And we sometimes have to deal with a ministry before we deal with our storms. We have to keep our eye on Jesus. I think that's what these two stories are trying to tell us, that we need to keep our eyes on Jesus or we will just sink. Because right after this story of them on the water, you read the next one and this crowd of people notices Jesus and all they want to do is touch the very edge of his garments. And he healed them all. Because that's who Jesus is. Jesus is a healer. He has compassion on the sick. He has compassion on the people who want to hear his word. Because he knows what we are, and we are all sinners. And we all need compassion from God. And Jesus knows that. And we should know that all human beings need compassion. Because we're all images of God who are broken images because of sin. But Jesus has compassion. And you see that compassion fulfilled on the cross. But you see little bits of this compassion fulfilled all over. And this time in the world is so small that we might get overwhelmed by the day-to-day or the big events like they do. They got overwhelmed by a friend's death. And it made them forget what the ministry was. Just like Peter got overwhelmed by a storm and forgot who Jesus was. But Jesus wants to show us who he is in compassion. So the things that I got out of this is obvious. I got God's timing is not our timing, and that we need to have compassion during the dark times. And what I think God is trying to tell us about himself in this is that God is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. That this is what he has come to do, is be the Messiah, be the guy who shows compassion to us in the world because we need it. But what is God trying to tell him about himself? Well, I think he's trying to tell him that his timing is not our timing. And sometimes we need to have a little patience and compassion. Okay, this has been Talking Bible. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please check out my other videos in Talking Bible to catch up. And I'll see you next time here at Talking Bible.